Welcome. It's really great to have you here. And I think we're all here together for a reason, and that is that not only do we want more pleasure in our lives, but we want more pleasure in the world. We want beauty, more love, more capacity, um, more willingness to be with opinions that differ from our own in order for us to be able to find a way forward. And that really is why I'm here today talking about pleasure. It's not a me first thing. It's actually a discovery that I experienced, which is that in experiencing pleasure, in that really deep sense, in experiencing it, I found what brought me to life. I found a way to delight with my children. I found something that was so heart-opening, um, that it gave me the space and the capacity to do more hard things. And it's not about doing hard things necessarily, but it is that the world is not getting any less complicated or complex. And it is that we need to have capacity somehow to be witness to what is happening in the world, and yet also continue to love and create and imagine. And that is what these conversations are all about. So here's a little of my story and how it is I came to be where I am and doing what I'm doing. I I was a really creative kid. I was that kid that was always drawing or dancing or painting or making my parents sit through some kind of a show that I had constructed with my friends. And I took that through my teen years. I was very much into theatre and into musicals and singing. And then as I made my way through to university, um, I realized, oh, I have to do something serious. And in assuming I needed to do something serious, I ended up studying law and quickly realized that law was not for me. So I did like a sidestep into the arts, and I found myself in something called arts management, which was working for not-for-profits in the arts space. But that wasn't for me either. And I remember a friend actually turning to me at one point after I decided to not complete that and said, "Oh, you just never do things like the normal way, do you, Vive?" And it stung at the time. But actually, I'm so grateful for the fact that I haven't done it the normal way. Uh, and so even in this early adult life, I was following these sort of breadcrumbs of what it was that brought me to life without being particularly conscious of it. And then sort of skip forward a few years, and my friend, I was working in a dental practice, and my friend turns to me and he's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Come and run events with me." And so I found myself in events and that later became running very large scale music events and regional events. And it was exhilarating, and we put on massive shows, and I learnt to do the whole spectrum of skills to deliver these events. And also I became a stoic robot. um, I have this distinct memory of building one of the biggest sites that I had built, which was for Sting and Paul Simon. And they were all outdoor events. And as part of that, we had to have this massive stage, and it took weeks. It took weeks to build these sites. And there was a massive team of people that came together and worked intensely to build these sites. And then you had the show, and then you just pulled it all out again. And that took days. And I remember standing there and I was looking at the stage, and I was looking, the concert had finished and the stage was coming out, and I was thinking, oh, what is the point? We build it and then we just pull it apart. And I realized, I think, in that moment that I was so disconnected from the experience, from the the joy and the delight and the reverence that people felt at the concert. I was just in do mode, grinding through every day to get the task done and then get the next task done. And that was sort of the first little inkling of like, why bother? What is the point of it all? Um, and it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years later, in fact, it might have even been longer, it might have been 5 years later, and I had had two children, um, and and I was the primary breadwinner of the family. And I was finding myself driving to work, and it was like grinding the gears. And as the gears were grinding in the car, I'm like trying to put a smile on my face in order to show up to work. But in fact, what I was feeling was that pain of not quite being at work and not quite being at home, not quite being the independent, achieving, um, kind of superwoman at work, and certainly not being the attuned, connected, able to drop into play and softness and connection with my kids. And it was so heartbreaking to realize, shit, I'm not really doing a good job anywhere. And certainly that was like a personal inner judgment. So I remember that. I remember the pain of that moment. And then we slipped into COVID, and the event industry started to really fall apart, like a lot of industries did during that time. And at this particular point, the business that I was working for, which I worked for 15 years, was being sold. And I remember distinctly, I was sitting in the carport, which had become our backyard, in the carport on these cane chairs, and I'd had a phone call from my friend, who was also my boss, and he was really, kind of telling me to lift my game. Like I really needed to memorize budgets and contracts, and that my soft skills were, not of value in this sale process for the business. And it absolutely broke me. Yeah, I was just sobbing. I remember sobbing on the chair, and I remember turning to my partner and I said, there has got to be a different way. There has got to be a different way to do this. And that was a real like turning point. Um, I think that was my first experience of realizing I have to find a way to work that that doesn't feel as if my life force is draining out of me. And this has nothing to do with the work or even the business. This was an old pattern and a way of being. And absolutely, there is the context of the way that businesses are run and business cultures, and that impacts how we operate as individuals. So I don't want to simplify that. But I think what I really noticed was it needed to start. It did need to start with me. I did need to find the different way in my own way. And and so off the back of that moment, my partner and I, we were like, let's move to the country. That old cliche, right? And my friend had this beautiful cottage at Stella Violet's in Manjimup, which is where I live now. And she's like, come, just come and stay. And we thought, we'll give it 12 months. And so we did it. We packed up, we moved, we rented our house out, and we were staying in this place that was just absolute serenity. It was just it is and continues to be so beautiful, this place, Stella Violet's. And yet, 6 months into this lifestyle change, I kind of had this this moment. In fact, I think I saw a book I bought this book and I hadn't read it yet, but I remember looking down at the title of the book, and it was something like, "Wherever you go, there you are." And I laughed because that was my experience. I was like, shit. I've moved down here. We've made this massive life change, and I'm still here. Me, with all of my things, with my um with my task mastering, with my rushing us around and needing to get places on time, which is fair. We do need to get places on time. But it was very much just an experience that I was creating because I wasn't able to drop into any kind of relaxation. I was still chronically quite stressed and doing, and that was all wrapped up in who I was and my identity. And so I realized that the really kind of sad and painful part of that was in not being able to drop into relaxation, into joy. I was also really struggling to connect with my kids, to accept their invitations to play, and I had to find a way to reconnect. And so I remember we had this beautiful veranda, concrete veranda it was, and it looked out into the garden. And there were textures scattered everywhere, and there was chalk and pencils, and it was this gorgeous kind of spring morning. And I turned to the girls and I thought, how about we all just draw together? And they love to draw. And I was like, let's just free draw. We don't have to draw anything. We're just going to free draw whatever scribbles that we want to scribble. And so we all sat down, and like I think it was about an hour later, and the girls were young at the time. I think they were maybe 3 and 5. And we look up, and the sense that I had, the feeling that I had in my body, the feeling I had with my girls, it was so settled. It was it was like a settled aliveness. And I was like, wow, wow. And I think that was my first conscious experience of mutual delight, of this like delighting in the thing that we were doing, but also delighting with each other and how that feels energetically when that happens. So that made me really curious, and I was like, hmm. And on this journey, I was also th going through a process of reconciling a very long-standing eating disorder or disordered eating, this binge purge cycle that I've been doing since my teens. Because, as I'm sure many mums listening to this will understand, there are these survival patterns that we develop that we're just desperate not to pass on to our kids. And we don't even always get to control that. But this particular one, this relationship to the body, this relationship to food, I really wanted to find a way to work with it because I knew that it's just so easy to pass these things on unconsciously with no blame, but I really wanted to work with it. And so I'd had this experience of drawing with the girls, and I was going through my coaching training with Tara Moore and her playing big facilitator training. And she had this thing around gift goals. And I thought that's a really interesting idea. Hmm. And then the other thread that I'm going to pull in is that I was reading Marion Woodman's Addiction to Perfection. And Marion Woodman worked a lot with women with eating disorders. And she would often sort of ask the question, when we're opening up the fridge, what is the sweetness that we're really seeking? And so I had all of these threads. I had this experience with the girls doing the drawing, the free drawing, and that connection and that sort of settled aliveness. And I had this idea of the gift goals from Tara Moore. And then I also, was sort of steeped in the Marion Woodman work and wondering about how might I reorganize the way that I respond, repattern this pattern that I've been doing for such a long time with the disordered eating. And so I had a bit of a random idea. I was like, I'm gonna try to respond differently when that urge comes in. I'm going to do something creative, or I'm going to go for a walk in the bush, or I might even have a bath. And all of those things, it required support. I had a conversation with my partner. I said, please, have you got the capacity for us to trial this experiment where when I get that kind of when I notice and I have the awareness around that binge purge cycle, can I do a mic drop and go and do this thing and see what happens? And and so that was kind of the beginning of what I would say is what I initially called gift habits. So creating habits that feel like a gift to yourself. And one of those gift habits was just drawing for 10 minutes per night when the kids went down to bed. And we would alternate putting the kids to bed, my partner and I. And I literally had a notepad and a black Sharpie. That was I had to make it as simple as possible with these gift habits so that there weren't any barriers. Um, and what was so fascinating about that experiment was, on the nights that I would put the girls to bed, I would be lying on the floor. I would be absolutely exhausted, thinking, I just want to crawl into bed. Like, I am so tired. Um, and so I would crawl out of their bedroom quietly. And then I would be like, no, Vive, you promised yourself. You promised that you'd just do this just for 10 minutes. And so I'd sit down and I'd start drawing, and that kind of segued into painting. And after 10 minutes, I mean, sometimes I would look up and it would be half an hour later, but after the 10 minutes, I'd be like, hmm, like my body would be open. I would notice that I was alert and I just felt like awake again. And I was like, what is that? Like, what is happening? How can I be so exhausted, like that I just needed to crawl into bed? And then after just this 10 minutes of doing this thing, I feel completely different. So that fascinated me. And and I was like, okay, there's something in this. There's something in what's happening in my body, this shift, this dramatic shift. And so I got really curious about Marion Woodman's work, and I was searching for more information about people who actually were trained or facilitators in Marion's work. And I came across body soul rhythms. And that was sort of my entry point. I went and I found someone who practiced something called body dreaming, which is what I'm training in now. And I had a body dreaming session. And in that session, the facilitator said, I don't know, I just kind of had this instinct. I'm just going to share this with you. Here is a flyer on Marion Dunlea's work. So Marion Dunlea then took Marion's work, Marion Woodman's work, and she brought in neuroscience, and she brought in Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, and she brought in attachment theory, as well as being a Jungian psychologist. And so here was this new emergent work, body dreaming. And I thought, okay, this is fascinating. And it was in body dreaming that I was first introduced to the idea of pleasure as a resource. So there are a number of people who are influencing what I'm doing right now, and body dreaming is one of them. Kimberly Ann Johnson and her work with the nervous system is another. And so it was in body dreaming that I was introduced to this idea of orienting and what orienting to pleasure can do for the system. Because as Kimberly had talked about, and also Marianne Dunlea had talked about, what had been noticed was happening in people's systems, in people's bodies, is that it's like I think Kimberly describes it as like a scratch on the record. It's like getting stuck in a groove. And so we find ourselves responding in a particular way always to a particular situation or a person. And maybe that is that we go into dissociation or into freeze. Maybe we feel like, oh, I just left my body in that moment. Maybe we feel like we get really angry and we feel like our limbs and our face gets flushed and we start sweating and our breath changes. And I think what is really important to hold when we're thinking about the system, the body as a system, is that we don't just have this one way that we respond to everything. It's so relational. And I think that's what I really love about body dreaming is that it brought in this idea that everything is relational. We are relational to ourselves and we are also relational to our environment that we're in. And that's constantly changing. And so how do we have more capacity to be with the the change, either the constant change or the habitual response to particular situations, to ways of relating to people, to environments? How do we have more capacity to be in that? Because when we cut ourselves off from the hard things, we're also cutting ourselves off from the deep pleasure and from the joy. And so, how we have a greater capacity is actually learning to be able to move from this place, perhaps where we are finding ourselves stuck in the groove, to the things that feel like a resource, to the joy, to the pleasure. And then that's how we create a more fluid movement. That's how we are able to move from, say, deep grief into laughing, or from rage into rest. It's not to say that we don't feel the rage. It's not to say that we don't have the hard feelings. In fact, what I've found through the work and through body dreaming and through a somatic approach is it's actually pleasure and being able to orient to pleasure that gives us capacity to feel these harder feelings more deeply, but to be able to not be to be able to not stay in them, to be stuck in them chronically. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. And it's not going to take a long time. And as I take you through this practice, what I would love you to hold is that everybody's system, everybody's body is going to respond differently to this. There is no one right way to do it. If you find you have a habit of being a good student, that's okay, but you don't need to be a good student. And it's certainly not about getting this right. Really, what we're doing in this practice is just starting to bring some noticing, some attention, and even a little bit of language, sensation language, to your experience of being in the world. So I'm going to ask you to just make yourself comfortable. If you're sitting, perhaps you want to shift your body a little. Perhaps you want to just get a little more comfortable, adjust yourself. If you're in a room, maybe you'd like to close the door. Maybe you might like to open a window to let some fresh air in. Whatever you need to do to just bring a little more comfort to your body as you're going through this practice. Okay. So if you're standing, feeling into your feet in the ground, you could even rock just back and forward. Maybe you want to sway a little from side to side. And if you're sitting, you're feeling those sitting bones in the chair. You're feeling the back of the chair supporting you if there is a back. And just becoming aware of the points in your body, either touching the floor or touching the chair. Letting your breath come and go naturally, not trying to control the breath in any way. And letting the body adjust if it wants to adjust. Like a cat or a dog, before they sit down, they always kind of move around a little bit. They always take that time just to get it as they'd like it. So I'm encouraging you to do that too. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we are slowly going to look around the space that we're in, letting the eyes lead and letting the whole architecture of the face and the shoulders take you on that journey around the room, taking your time and just seeing what you notice. Seeing if there's anything that catches your attention. Could be as simple as light through the window. It could be the color of something. Maybe it's a texture. And when you find that thing that's got your attention, I just want you to stay with that. Just stay with that for a moment. And as you're staying with it, just start to describe to yourself what it is you're noticing, the color, the shape, the texture. Maybe it's bringing a memory to mind. Maybe even there's words coming through. Really just letting the gaze stay with this thing that's caught your attention. And then closing the eyes now and orienting into your own body and just seeing if, as you're holding the image that you were, the thing that you were looking at before, if you can find perhaps a place in the body or a sensation in the body that feels connected. And it's okay if you can't. But maybe if you're finding it hard to find that there's a connection point, maybe what you're going to do is just notice what you can feel. Are your hands warm or cold? Can you feel something around the cheeks, the jaw? Maybe you can really feel the sitting bones connecting to the chair. And if it's welcome to come back to the image that you were looking at in the room before, just bringing that back in and seeing what it's like in your body to be with that image, to be with that thing that you noticed. Just holding with curiosity, what do you notice is happening in your body as you're with that object, that thing that you're oriented to? And just staying with that for a few more moments. And then when you're ready, just gently starting to open the eyes. You don't need to bring them back to the screen straight away. You might find that you want to stand up or that you want to just move a little bit. Maybe you want to place your hands together. Maybe you want to just place your hand on your heart or on your tummy. Just following the lead of your body and what your body would like to do in this moment. And when you're ready, just coming back to the screen. So that is an experience of what it is like for us to orient to something in the present, in the space that we're in. And we're starting to develop a felt sense in our bodies with what it's like when we relate with something that is pleasurable, that is a resource. So that is just a little experience of one of the parts of what we do in body dreaming, how we train ourselves to work with pleasure as a resource. And what fascinates me about it is how accessible it is, how accessible it is in a moment to find something that we can relate with. And even if it's just the tiniest bit, and to notice what happens in the system, in the body when we do that. And so that's what I am inviting you all to come along to. So after the summit, I'm going to be running a free class. It's called Pleasure as a Resource. And it really is taking you through the full arc. So it includes a somatic warm-up, some teaching. So I'll be teaching around understanding what's happening in the body as a system, in the nervous system, under threat, but also in safety. So I think it's important to understand both of those pieces. And that is also something that Kimberly Ann Johnson talks a lot about. Then we'll go into a little bit of body dreaming practice. And then we will have a little of the rest digest. So giving the system space for things to integrate. And then we finish with a creative practice. Now, you do not need to be an artist to do the creative practice, although I tell you what, it's such a wonderful experience to have as a creative person. But when we're doing the creative expression at the end, this is really gathering the gold. This is really letting the body bring through what it is you've experienced in that class. And so I would love to see you there. I will share the link to the class below this video. And I just welcome you all to enjoy these conversations, these 18 incredible conversations with speakers from such a breadth of lived experience and expertise. And I really hope it helps you to drop any judgment, any idea that pleasure is a me first thing. Because really, pleasure, as I think Michael Mead says in his interview, pleasure is how we find what it is that we are going to bring to the world. Pleasure is that navigation tool, the things that bring us to life, the things that animate us, the things that we find pleasurable in that life-giving way, because I also understand that there's there is pleasure and then there is pleasure. And there is pleasure that is addictions. And there is pleasure that is generative and life-giving. So holding that complexity and understanding that pleasure in the sense that it hasn't been repressed, pleasure when it's connected deep into the callings and the what I'm here to do in the world, that is so generative and so life-giving. And it is also so capacity building. And so I really do believe that the more that we can orient to pleasure, the more that we understand what pleasure is here to do, not just for us, but for the collective and for the world, the better. I really hope you enjoy these conversations.